Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Nate vs. Hot Takes, the newest podcast where I talk about hot takes about all of my favorite things. I'm, of course, your wonderful host, Nathan Nadler, and before we get rolling today, I'm going to provide a framework for the viewer, for the listener, for you, so you can know everything that you need to know about this podcast. It's going to be 3 segments, and the first one will be Nate Knows, what I like to call it. I'll provide all the background info that you need to understand everything I'm yapping about in that episode. And then, it's time for the main event. The name of this podcast itself, Nate vs. Hot Takes. I will be taking on 3 of the greatest hot takes that the internet has to offer at that very moment, or the best 3 hot takes that I could find, and bestow upon them either the beholded title of valid or invalid. Not what you want to see there with invalid. And then the show will wrap up with Nate's takes. That'll be me giving my own takes instead of the internet's takes. I'll be saying what I believe will happen in that subject matter. Alrighty, with all the formalities out of the way, let's dive into this highly anticipated, I'd hope to think it's highly anticipated Episode 1, where we're talking about the No Fun League itself, the NFL. We are now in the barren wasteland of the off-season, if you do not know, if you're not an NFL fan for some reason. Which sucks as a fan, as a massive NFL fan. But for me, as a podcaster, this is great. You know, NFL pundits, NFL fans are trying to get their greatest takes here in the offseason. Nobody knows what's going to happen. You know, I'm watching reruns of NFL games from when Bush was still a president, either Bush, but I've got great takes on the internet lined up for y'all today. But before we go into those takes, I'm going to go to Nate Knows so I can provide all the info that you need to know. I have compiled all this information over a lengthy research process, definitely. And we're a couple of weeks away from starting the season. You know, preseason starting up very soon if it's not already started by the time this is released. And DraftKings, everyone's favorite sports betting site, not sponsored, has the Kansas City Chiefs as the favorite to host the Lombardi for the 3rd straight year in a row. I'll get to that later, personally, but we'll see. DraftKings thinks the Chiefs. On NFL.com's power rankings, the Chiefs, 49ers, Ravens, Lions, and Eagles are their top 5. Pretty solid top 5. And rounding out the bottom in the absolute doghouse, we have the Panthers, the Patriots, Titans, Commanders, and Broncos in that bottom 5. And looking at some of the biggest stories floating around, the Cowboys, arguably a top 10 team, still yet to re-sign wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, arguably a top 5 receiver in the entire league. And they've claimed to be all in this year, but obviously, if you've followed the NFL, they have not made many offseason acquisitions, and is still yet to re-sign CeeDee. The Panthers, who are listed currently by the NFL as the worst team in the NFL, need Bryce Young, former first overall pick, to have a great bounce-back year here in his 2nd year for that team to be at all relevant. And then the Chiefs, can they be the first back-to-back-to-back? I think the first back-to-back-to-back champion, looking for their 3rd straight Super Bowl in a row with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and Travis Kelce, that divine trio. Loaded AFC. If you look at that top 5, the Chiefs, the Ravens, those are the 2 big ones in the AFC, and even outside of that top 5, you've got a lot of AFC teams that are really solid, really gunning for that Lombardi, besides Kansas City. But now, you know everything. The stage is now set. Let's go on to the main event. Nate versus Hot Takes. Welcome to the best segment, arguably, in this entire show, Nate versus Hot Takes. And our first challenger will come from Reddit, where user Aeon1508 claims that Michael Penix is the best quarterback in this draft. That's for sure a take, an interesting take to get us started. First take ever on this show. I personally think that this could be a valid take. I'll tell you why. I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I think this could possibly be a valid take. If you look at all the round 1 quarterbacks, Penix it was a questionable pick, but he's definitely in the best situation out of all of these round one guys. You have a good mentor, an older guy in Kirk Cousins who just signed with Atlanta, and he's getting older. See how he regresses or progresses, but Penix is going to have at least a year or two to, develop behind Kirk Cousins, arguably a top 15, top 10 quarterback, whatever you want to say about Cousins. He's a good mentor. He's definitely a good guy, and he can give Penix a nice foothold in Atlanta. And if you look at their skill players, you got guys like Drake London, a young wide receiver, a young tight end, and Pitts, and then Bijan Robinson as your running back. So they've got a lot of good pieces surrounded around Cousins and hopefully Penix in the future if they can keep those guys there. And he's not expected to play immediately, obviously. Cousins is the guy. He's got a 4-year deal for crazy amount of money. But he doesn't need to be that guy immediately, like a Caleb Williams, like a Jaden Daniels, like maybe a Bo Nix. Another factor, he had 5 years in college to develop. He's an older guy, so he knows what he's doing with a football in his hands. And he threw for almost 10,000 yards at Washington in his 2 years at Washington. He was at Indiana for a couple years, but he really shined at Washington with the Huskies. His touchdown-interception ratio last year, 36-11, so maybe a couple few too many picks, but he was very solid, certainly, leading them in that college football playoff. He's an absolute dog. He knows what he's doing. He's shown that he knows what to do to get to the playoff, and he's got a high ceiling. I mean, this guy has an absolute cannon for an arm. He's everything that you want in a quarterback prospect, and he has all that time to develop. But if you look at those other quarterbacks, that's the big issue that we're looking at. Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick. Say what you want about Caleb Williams. The guy has talent. I'm not sure. I haven't watched a ton of USC football. Obviously questionable if USC had enough quality competition, and he lost a bowl game to Tulane a couple years ago. But Caleb Williams is a very talented guy. I've seen a couple clips of him in training camp. I mean, he's making throws. He's making impressive throws, but you also had Zach Wilson. If you look at Zach Wilson a couple years ago in that pro day, that one throw he had, if you know what I'm talking about, he had a crazy throw. So video doesn't show everything, but Caleb Williams has a lot of talent. But the only issue I'd say with Caleb Williams that he's being thrust into that starting role immediately. Obviously, he does have talent around him, but it's never easy to make a transition into the NFL year one like a CJ Stroud type guy. Jaden Daniels is your next round 1 quarterback. I love Jaden Daniels. I'm a big LSU guy, but he's in Washington. I mean, the Commanders, they have a couple of guys. You got Scary Terry. I think they signed Austin Eckler as well. But that offensive line is not great. The rest of that team is not great. So Jaden Daniels is going to be thrown into the fire a little bit. He's going to be running for his life a lot, which he did at LSU, and it worked out. But against an NFL defense, that's not always going to work as well. So Jaden Daniels definitely more difficult for him than a Caleb Williams. And then if you look at your other 2 first-round quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix, these guys are not as highly touted prospects. Bo Nix is a complete wild card. He had a couple of years at Auburn, and then obviously with Oregon, with the Ducks. He also had a lot of college experience, but he's going into Denver. For me, it's a complete wild card. I don't think that he's going to have the time to develop, especially if he starts here year 1. And if you look at J.J. McCarthy, I just don't believe in the kid that much, to be honest with you. At Michigan, he didn't have to throw the ball a whole lot with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards at running back, that ground and pound running back room. And he's just a little bit of a game manager. He's got Justin Jefferson, but I just don't think that J.J. McCarthy is going to show, at least in year 1, and maybe even in the next couple of years, he's not going to show too much promise. I think Minnesota will move on from him by his 3rd year, his 4th year. Maybe a Zach Wilson type situation if we want to go back to Zach Wilson. So I think that Michael Penix, he obviously could be the best quarterback in this entire class, at least for the first round. You got a couple of guys that fell outside the first round. Spencer Rattler, I'm obviously a Saints fan, but I love Spencer Rattler. But he's sitting behind Derek Carr, but obviously not a first-round talent, so maybe not as much of a chance. Maybe he'll pull a Brock Purdy type thing, but Penix is in a great spot. He has the potential. I think his main competitor is going to be a Caleb Williams type, especially if he shows out here in his first year with the Bears. But they're the Bears. That's the main thing. The Bears are always going to be the Bears. And as much as I love Jaden Daniels, I think that he's going to get killed in Washington. So I'm going to give this a valid. Valid. We're going to put maybe a graphic up here. Valid. Michael Penix, best quarterback in the draft. Hopefully. Maybe. Possibly. Hopefully not, actually. I don't like the Falcons. All right. Take number 2. Moving conferences, and we're going to be talking about a different young quarterback. Not a rookie quarterback, but definitely a young quarterback. SB Nation says the Indianapolis Colts are going to make the playoffs this year. Well, I will provide my analysis at the very end. I'll provide my valid or invalid at the very end. But, I mean, if you look at this Colts team, the big question is Anthony Richardson. He had a solid couple of games to start last season. He had 700 all-purpose yards, 7 touchdowns. He went 2-2 in his 4 games before obviously getting injured. And this kid is electric. I mean, he's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of speed. He's athletic as all hell. I think that his potential is limitless. I'm hopping on the Anthony Richardson bandwagon. But the question is, if Richardson can continue, if he can build off of that from last year, can the rest of this team also support him and allow them to truly go to the playoffs? It's not going to be a one-man show. If you looked at what the Texans did last year with C.J. Stroud was amazing, obviously. But there were other guys. You had Tank Dell. You had, there's other guys in Houston that allowed them to go to the playoffs and make that run. So Indy's going to have to have some of those other guys make plays. But if you look offensively, they've got pieces. It's not just Anthony Richardson. They've got Michael Pittman Jr., who's a quality wide receiver, maybe top 15, top 10 wide receiver. And Jonathan Taylor. They had a bunch of issues with him last year, but Jonathan Taylor is that guy. He's an incredible running back. And their defense, was below average last year. But, I mean, if you're looking at their situation, you didn't have your starting quarterback. Gardner Minshew, obviously, is great, but he's not an elite quarterback. He's your backup quarterback. You're thrust in that role. You don't really know what you're going to do with your backup quarterback. So that defense was below average last year, but obviously, due to that situation, they can improve off of that, especially if Anthony Richardson and this offense pops off this year. This defense won't have to do as much next year. But if you look at this team, they went 9-8 last year without Anthony Richardson for a majority of the season. They went 9-8 in what is an AFC that is very good and is still very good. But they went 9-8, and that's something that they can only build off of. And if you go get another win, another 2 wins, another 3 wins, you may be looking at least a wild card spot and maybe even challenging the Texans for the division title. Obviously, the Jaguars are in there as well, but if you're truly looking at the front runner, it's the Texans. But if C.J. Stroud maybe has a little bit of sophomore slump, Stephon Diggs doesn't acclimate properly into Houston, if he's a big crybaby again, you could see that these Colts making the playoffs as the AFC South champion. But the AFC, as I said, is very, very good. I mean, you have a lot of teams in there. You have the Chiefs, you have the Ravens, you have the Texans in your own division, you have the Jaguars in your own division. But this team, because they came in 3rd place last year in what was a solid division, their schedule's pretty easy, relatively easy. They got a couple of tough games. They play the Bills, the Dolphins, and the Lions, but those games are all at home. They're all in Lucas Oil. So you're at least having a little bit of an edge. Even if these teams are a little bit better than you, you can still definitely win those games. I think they're also playing the Jets this year, but obviously Aaron Rodgers, what will he do? He's like 40, whatever, how old he is. But there's not a guarantee that Aaron Rodgers is still going to be Aaron Rodgers, and that team's going to be able to be elite next year. The Jets are a threat, but the Colts can definitely beat them. It's a winnable game for the Colts. But overall, I think with all this being said, they just need 1 or 2 teams in the AFC to stumble a little bit. They need to win the easy games they've been provided and maybe win one of these tough games at home. Maybe the Dolphins have a down year. I think that's very realistic. They just paid Tua, but is Tua the guy? But they can definitely beat the Dolphins. They can maybe beat the Bills if Josh Allen gets into turnover trouble. So I think this is a completely valid take. I think I can see the Colts in maybe a 6 seed, 6-7 seed, probably a 6 seed. If you see like a Dolphins team go play poorly, and they win all these easy games. I think it's a totally valid take. SB Nation, well done. Valid. And our final take will once again come from Reddit. Oh, the dark depths of Reddit. Where user JZNVH is making possibly the boldest claim of this pod. He says the Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings, oh no, are not only making the playoffs, but winning the NFC North. Where I'm not a big Vikings guy. I'm a Saints fan. I don't like the Vikings at all. But this does not seem very possible. The NFC North is probably the best division in the NFC. You've got the Lions, who are just incredible. Jared Goff, Dan Campbell is that guy. You got the Packers. I don't know how much trust I have in Jordan Love. I haven't watched too much Packers football, but Jordan Love, if he keeps playing well, that Packers team is once again another threat. The Bears with Caleb Williams, and he's got solid receivers. He's got Keenan Allen. You got Rome Odunze. I mean, that team is also a contender for that crown. I think the Vikings are really the only team who aren't contending for the NFC North title. I mean, J.J. McCarthy is obviously that big guy. He's the first-round quarterback coming out of Michigan. I mean, we've talked about McCarthy a little bit earlier, but I just don't think he has what it takes. He has the best receiver in the league, or arguably the best receiver in the league, top 3 receiver in Justin Jefferson. But the question is, will he be able to use Jefferson properly? And if he doesn't, and if he's ineffective and he plays poorly, this Vikings team is going to suck. Like, they're going to be really, really bad if J.J. McCarthy's bad. They're going to be top 5 pick in the draft next year bad. And honestly, I think that, especially with a guy like McCarthy, you need him to develop. And they don't have anyone for him to really develop behind unless it's Sam Darnold, I think, is their other quarterback. And they start Sam Darnold for a couple of games. But McCarthy needs a year or two. He needs to be in a Michael Penix situation. But they're not giving him that. He's most likely going to be thrust into the fire and have to play the entirety of his rookie season. And honestly, I just don't think this team has what it takes with McCarthy at the helm. He didn't throw the ball enough last year at Michigan. I don't think he got enough reps. He's just not that guy. He has a couple of weapons, JJ. He's got a solid O-line, but their defense also was very, very bad last year, ranking the bottom third of the entire NFL. So unless this team does an entire 180, once again, I'm bringing this up again, unless they pull a Houston Texans, that's the reference that everyone's using. If they pull a Houston Texans, it's obviously possible if McCarthy says that he's that guy. If he proves that he's that guy and he throws 15 touchdowns to Justin Jefferson next year, it's possible. But even if J.J. McCarthy is that guy next year, I don't know if it's possible for them to overtake the Lions for the division lead. The Lions are obviously the favorite in that division, and I don't see them sweeping the Lions. Maybe they can win one game against Detroit, but the Lions are going to win that division. I don't think it's possible for the Vikings to beat the Lions. I think they could maybe make the playoffs if they are good enough and McCarthy's good enough and that defense rebounds and Jefferson is Jefferson, he doesn't get hurt. But I don't think it's remotely possible for them to beat out the Lions, to beat out the Packers, maybe even to beat out the Bears. This could be the first time, if the Vikings are good, this could be the first time we see, all 4 teams in a division in the playoffs. But I don't have a lot of trust in Minnesota. With my bias aside, looking at their numbers, it's just not, it does not look very possible. So I'm going to have to call this, our first one, invalid. That sucks. That sucks for Reddit. Reddit's 1-1 right now. We'll see how they do over the course of the next couple episodes. But with all that being said, that is it for our second segment, Nate vs. Hot Takes. And now that we are at the end of Nate vs. Hot Takes, I'm going to announce we're going to have a hydration break. Always stay hydrated. Ugh. Oh, I took the lid off. But yes, always stay hydrated, especially when you're listening to podcasts. All right. I think everyone's nice and hydrated. You ready for the third segment? Let's go to Nate's Takes. We're all nice and cooled down from those hot takes. We're going to heat right back up. And obviously, a little bit of bias with this first take. But I think that my New Orleans Saints are playoff contenders. I'm not saying they'll win the NFC South. I'm not saying that they'll even be second place in the NFC South. But if you can have, if you can have the Saints win 10, 11 games, you can have, the Falcons win about as many games, the same for the Buccaneers. The Saints can definitely be a playoff team if Kirk's not able to acclimate into Atlanta, and Atlanta stumbles again. They maybe only are an 8-9 win team, and if maybe the Bucs take a step back, Baker takes a step back, which I don't think is likely, but it's possible. They could win that division. The Saints can obviously win that division. I think even with those things not happening, the Saints can win the division. Derek Carr showed a lot of promise at the end of last year. Obviously, the Saints weren't great last year. A lot of injury problems. Carr obviously did Derek Carr type things, but he showed flashes at the end of last year. And this Saints team is old, very old, but they're very solid. They've got a lot of good pieces. They've got Clint Kubiak offensively to help lead that offense. That was the main complaint. If you know anything about the Saints, Pete Carmichael was the offensive play caller, and a lot of people wanted his head for the majority of the season, and for good reason. He's finally gone. So maybe with a fresh look on offense, Carr can really show what he's capable of. He had a couple of very solid seasons as a Raider. He was great as a Raider. He's like the Raiders' best passer of all time or something like that. So it's very possible that Derek Carr goes back to young Derek Carr days with Clint Kubiak there. And they've got pieces offensively. You've got Alvin Kamara, who's older, but he's still a quality running back. And they've got Chris Olave, who is probably a top 10 young receiver. If you're talking all receivers, probably a top 30 receiver in the entire NFL. And Rashid Shaheed is an absolute demon, speed demon. And he's an incredibly good receiver. A lot of people don't know about him, but he is a quality number 2 receiver. The defense is one of the best, is definitely a top 10 defense, and it could be one of the best defenses in the league if they play up to their full potential. They've got Cam Jordan, who's an absolute dog. Demario Davis, absolute dog. Marshawn Lattimore, absolute dog. This defense is full of stars. They've got a couple linebackers that are good. Other than Demario, they got Pete Werner. White boy Werner, as I like to call him. But this defense is very good, and if they can play to their full potential, they can almost will the Saints into the playoffs, even if Derek Carr plays poorly. And if you look at this draft class that the Saints had, a main issue for the Saints was the offensive line last year, and we bolstered that. Tylisi Fuaga out of Oregon State, first round pick, making this offensive line a lot better. And there was Eric McCoy, I think the Saints center, was doing an interview, and he was saying he's the best rookie offensive lineman I've ever seen. I mean, that's high praise. Eric McCoy is not a bad offensive lineman either. He's a solid center, guard, whatever we have him at. Lord knows with the Saints. And Kool-Aid McKinstry got a guy a lot of people had a first-round grade on. He went in the second to us, and he's going to bolster that secondary that is already very solid. Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore. But he's going to be a solid corner. And he doesn't have to play a lot this year. Even if he doesn't play a lot, this secondary is still going to be very, very good. And aside from Olave, aside from Rashid Shaheed, offensively, you got A.T. Perry, a second-year receiver. He had a couple of ridiculous catches last year. And I think that if he can be a solid number 3 receiver, this offense is just going to be ridiculous. Kendre Miller, second-year running back out of TCU, another solid option out of the backfield. You got that running back room is also stacked, by the way. Kamara, Jamal Williams, who had like 16 touchdowns for the Lions like 2 years ago, and also Dallin Holker, undrafted tight end, but he's a guy that a lot of people have been talking about throughout the draft process, and they were saying, this guy has opportunity to be special. I don't know why he didn't get drafted. But he's been showing flashes at camp, and if he can even do a little bit, like this tight end room if they can play to their full potential. I mean, that's obviously the story with every team, but if they can play to their full potential, Dallin Holker, rookie, Jawan Johnson, Foster Moreau, they've got a couple of solid tight ends. Not one guy needs to be that guy. There's a lot of guys. They all got guys. But with all that being said, the Saints have an opportunity to make the playoffs this year. The Panthers are probably going to be bad. Bryce Young, even if he's really good, the Panthers don't have a lot of solid pieces surrounding him. So even if he does have a great sophomore season, then the Panthers, I still think, are probably in that 6-win territory, 5-win territory, 4-win territory. Even if they go to a 7-win team, it's just not going to be enough. The Bucs are solid. The Bucs are a good football team. Baker Mayfield went to high school around where I live. Baker Mayfield's, I think he's a very quality quarterback. A lot of people still sleep on him, but Baker is that guy, and he makes the Bucs dangerous. And then if you look at Atlanta, that's probably one of the most hyped teams of this entire offseason, the Atlanta Falcons. Kirk Cousins, the big signing. And you've got those pieces on offense. And if Kirk can do his thing, if Kirk can be the Kirk that we've seen in Minnesota that is able to be an elite top 10 quarterback, then the Falcons are scary. But with all that being said, that's a lot of what ifs. And even this take is a lot of what ifs, but the Saints obviously have the opportunity. Even if they don't win the NFC South, they have a big chance to make their way into the playoffs as even a wild card. So staying with the NFC South, I will stay there. I've talked about this a little bit, talking about the Saints. But for this next take, I think the NFC South is possibly one of the best divisions in football. Definitely not the worst division in football as they've been maybe the last 2 years. They've been considered the worst division in football. But they're definitely a top 2 division in the NFC, with the only division being better than them is the NFC North. And then with the AFC, you just never know. The AFC is kind of nuts. But the NFC South is now a quality division. You've got the Falcons, who we've talked about, with Kirk Cousins. The Falcons have the opportunity to be a very good football team and possibly make a run to the NFC Conference Championship. Who knows? The Buccaneers, another very quality football team, just a solid team. Obviously, the division winners last year, and they are a team that looks to just do the same exact thing. And if you got a 10-win Bucs team, you got a 10-11-win Falcons team, and then if you have the Saints, like I've said, if they're solid, like I predict they will be, another 10-11-win team, the only real question is the Panthers, and obviously every division kind of needs a bad team. But if Bryce Young does what Bryce Young did in college, then the Panthers can be 7 wins, 8 wins, and just not be awful. And if you're looking at the NFC, I mean, if you think about the possibilities for this NFC South, and if you stack them up against the rest of the NFC, let's look NFC East first. The Cowboys, they're all in. I mean, they're the Cowboys. Lord knows with the Cowboys. You got the Eagles, who are obviously a Super Bowl contender for the last couple of years. Jalen Hurts is a quality quarterback, definitely a top 10 quarterback. Some people put him a top 5 quarterback. A.J. Brown, the rest of that offense is ridiculous. But the rest of that division, the Giants. You have the New York Giants. Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback for the New York Giants. And I've held out hope for Daniel Jones for a lot of years now. And I know they extended him, but he's just, I don't think he's that guy. Malik Neighbors is a quality receiver coming out of LSU. It'll give Jones a little bit of help, but that Giants team as a whole, I just don't think has the opportunity to do much. And then the Commanders, I love Jaden Daniels a lot. And I think that Jaden Daniels can be a very good NFL quarterback, but this will not be the year that Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders are very, very good. This is not their time to be quality. So the NFC East, not better. The NFC West. The NFC West is good, maybe. The 49ers are, once again, perennial Super Bowl contender. The Seattle Seahawks have Geno Smith at quarterback. He had a great year 2 years ago. Last year was a little bit of a down year for Geno, so we don't really know what the Seahawks are going to do. The Cardinals, Kyler Murray's your quarterback. Is he going to play COD too much? I like Kyler Murray a lot, actually. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr. now this year. He's a solid quarterback, but the rest of that Cardinals roster does not excite me. And then the Rams with an aging Matthew Stafford. Stafford shows that he's still that guy. He still can be a very, very good quarterback. He's got Puka, he's got Kyram, he's got Cooper Kupp, but can that defense sustain that offense? Can they help that offense and make the Rams a good team? So I think that while they could be better than the NFC South, the NFC West, I think that some of those teams will just not have enough juice. And then the NFC North, I think, will be better than the NFC South. The Lions are one of the best teams in the entire NFL. The Packers are very good with Jordan Love. The Bears are everyone's favorite team to talk about this offseason with Caleb Williams, so who knows? And then the Vikings, who are probably going to be very bad. But those top three teams, I think, are enough to lift them over the top and make them the best division in the NFC. But the NFC South, second best division in the NFC. When we look at the AFC, it's hard to match that up, but I'd say they're definitely a top four division in football if they can play up to their full potential. So that's that take. A lot of people probably won't agree with that, but as someone who's spent a lot of time looking at the NFC South, I'm a Saints fan. I know these teams very well. I think that this could be a quality division this year. And for the final take of the day, final take of Nate's Takes, we're going to go to the AFC and the sunny beaches of Los Angeles. We're not going to talk about the Rams. I've already talked about the Rams. We're going to talk about the team that I don't think I've even mentioned this episode, the Los Angeles Chargers, the other team down in SoFi. I've got a couple of words. Justin Herbert is elite. Jim Harbaugh is elite. And that's a head coach quarterback duo. That's the basis of an incredible football team. I didn't even say the name of this take. The Chargers are going to make the playoffs this year. And that's bold. When we've seen college coaches come to the NFL, Urban Meyer with the Jags, obviously an absolute disaster. But Jim Harbaugh is not Urban Meyer. Jim Harbaugh is better than Urban Meyer. The big question for this Chargers team is obviously the wide receiver room. A lot of people were down on Quentin Johnston last year, who's their rookie wide receiver out of TCU. I love Quentin Johnston. He's a great deep threat. And if he obviously dropped a lot of balls last year, but if he can improve here in training camp, he can be a quality wide receiver for Justin Herbert, not Justin Jefferson, to go deep to. And then Ladd McConkey, who they picked up in the draft, Ladd McConkey, another solid wide receiver. I think they also got Josh Palmer. So they don't have an elite number one receiver. That's pretty obvious. But they've got a couple of solid guys, and I think that Herbo will be able to deal with that. I think Herbo will be fine with those guys. They beefed up that O-line. Whoa. Call it the Joe line now with Joe Alt at left tackle. But the O-line is a lot better with Joe Alt. And Justin Herbert's going to have a lot of time to throw the football. You got Rashawn Slater at the other tackle spot. Actually, I don't know who's going to be left tackle, who's going to be protecting that blind side. It might be Slater. But that offensive line's going to be a lot better. Herbert's going to have a lot more time. The run game's going to be able to develop a lot better. And Herbert's not going to have to throw the ball 40, 50 times a game. And the defense has the potential to be solid mid-defense, but doesn't need to be better than a mid-defense. This offense is elite, like Justin Herbert can be, like Justin Herbert can make this offense be. Jim Harbaugh can scheme up what is maybe a mid-team into a playoff team. Jim Harbaugh is an incredible coach. And if you look at their division, it's not great. You've got the Chiefs, who are obviously probably, maybe, going to win another Super Bowl this year. But outside of the Chiefs, you got the Broncos with Bo Nix. I mean, Bo Nix could be great, but the Broncos are just mid. They're not better than mid. And even if Bo Nix does poorly, then they're a lot worse than mid. And the Raiders, God help the Raiders. Poor Raiders fans moving to Las Vegas, and now that team's always in turmoil. It's never a steady situation down there. Is Gardner Minshew their quarterback? I think he's probably going to play over Aiden McConnell. But the Raiders don't excite me at all. So I think this can be the Chargers can be the second best team in this division. And in the AFC, it's kind of like a situation we were talking about earlier. In the NFC in the AFC with the Colts, you need a couple of teams that are really good to just be kind of bad, and to have maybe lose a couple more games than they're expected to, and they can slot into a wild card spot easily if Justin Herbert does what we know Justin Herbert can do, and this Chargers team plays up to their full potential, which is, I guess, been the theme of everything I've said today. It all depends on these players really being elite. But before we go, that's my last take, obviously, of this Nate's Takes segment. But before we go, I will give my Super Bowl take because that's probably what everyone is curious about. Lions. The Detroit Lions, with Slim Shady at their back, Dan Campbell as their head coach. Jared Goff, I didn't like him with the Rams. He has been great with the Lions. This team has so much talent. Their offense is absolutely ridiculous. And they were a stone's throw away from the Super Bowl last year. I think with another year of development, this can be a Super Bowl team. And I think even if they face the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, they can beat KC in the Super Bowl. So that's my take with that. Be mad. Be happy. I don't really care if you like that take. Doesn't matter. But Detroit will finally get to rejoice come February 2025 if you're listening to me. With all that being said, that's the end of our final segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the inaugural episode of Nate vs. Hot Takes. Obviously, just a little project that I've worked on. You know, this has really been a fun thing for me to set up and now to film and hopefully to edit and post. If you enjoyed it, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify. Leave a comment on Instagram or YouTube, or don't. You know, it's America, free country. You don't have to. But if you do leave a comment, I will be letting y'all know on Instagram probably what the topic will be for next episode. So you can leave a take for next episode, maybe, just maybe. If it's not an awful take, if it's something I can actually talk about, I can use it for the next episode, and we'll credit you. You know, you be famous in the Nate vs. Hot Takes community. But thank you so much. This has been really a pleasure to film. Have a great rest of your day. Signing off. I'll stop yapping now. I'm Nate, and that is just my take.